And so our playthrough of Order and Opportunity Making of the Post-Cold War World Order, currently on the P500 list with GMT Games, continues. And so Russia is up, and as you've seen in the previous videos, we start going through the segments of the action phase, starting with the development segment. So we draw a card. So this one's a Czech card that replaces, or rather occurs before the already revealed development event. Czech cards always override whatever event has been marked as upcoming. And so now each power in the reverse order of play has to conduct a terror threat check. Let's have a look how that works. Reverse order of play means the EU will start. They have two levels of terror threat as shown here in the home space on the track by that black terror threat marker. So now the options are either to roll 1d6 and hope to roll higher, so 3 or more than the terror threat level, or pay resources for die roll modifiers to improve that roll and then go and make it. EU is going to pay 2 resources to avoid the check. If you fail it, you're going to lose a victory point. And EU with 5 victory points here shown on the records track versus just 1 more than the authoritarians is a tight spot to be in. The US is running away at the moment a little bit, so they choose to spend some resources. And next up, the US have got 3 levels. They will also choose to pay 2, 3. And Russia has no levels of terror threats, so no check needed. And then finally China has got 1 level. They will also choose to pay. That's the check, and so we set the card aside. We will need it later on again when we rebuild the development straw deck. Going to the opportunity segment, is Russia able to resolve an opportunity on the map? We talked about this in a previous video. Looking through the map spaces, I don't see any opportunities, so let's go to the action segment. And here we go into the Russian hand window and nominate a suit. I've got a plan, so let's see how we make that happen. We play these 2 cards and we take the consequence for 2 economic cards, which is increase in polarization, placing polarization here in the Russian home space. And so let's see, here's an interesting thing. So we start here with this card over here. It's got the momentum effect, meaning that the Russians have here a chance of earning the right to play what's called a second command, so nominate another suit once they're done with this. If they manage to use this card to establish control anywhere, economic control that is, on the map. And we can do so here in Eastern Europe. So let's use the card for its suit and the corresponding action, which is to increase economic influence. And we pay 1 resource for space selection. So here's something that happens now as a consequence, namely reactions. We can see that there are a number of cards, such as this EU card and the Russian card itself, that may be used by the owner to react to the type of action that has just occurred. So here on the EU card you can see it says react if economic or cultural action played in this region. Well, this was just the case in that Russians took an economic action there, and so the EU is first to react. Let's have a look at the card again. It says EU resources must 1 to place 1 economic influence. So EU will now react. They will spend 1 resource and they will place 1 economic influence there. Reactions themselves do not evoke other reactions. And so the card in the middle is not a reaction card. And then so we go to the Russian reaction. So they may react to their own actions, that is within the rules. And so Russians also spend 1 resource to place 1 tension in a space with democratic economic influence. interesting. Elite capture Russia space 1 resource, and now we have a number of spaces with democratic economic influence. We have the Baltic states over here. We have Russia itself, and we have the EU home space. Well, Russia will react by placing tension in the EU home space. This is dangerous for the EU because, as explained, I believe, in the previous video, the levels of tension in a space affect the governance level of the space, as indicated by these governance levels markers. EU starts as democratic and in fact will not shift from that type, but if tension rises too high and we have the corresponding so-called war of ideas check, then EU will lose 1 victory point instead. So this is a looming danger here for the EU. So we'll see if there is a reaction from the EU down the line. And so that's 1 card played, and Russia activates the momentum effect there, so they can take here a momentum token as a reminder that they may play a second command very soon. That card has been used, and so with the other card, Russia is going to place economic influence into EU itself. It has already paid the space selection cost, so placing economic influence is then, so to speak, free, except the card has to be used for it. And so that resolves the first command from Russia. They will immediately go and discard this marker they took to take a second command, and we return to the Russian hand. And Russia will now play this lone military suit card. He has another bit of trouble happening and being generated for the democracies in the game. So Russia also has military influence, as shown here on the player mat of Russia. They don't have any of these cubes, military influence cubes, on the map just yet, but they will now bring 1 into play. The rule about authoritarians' military influence is that if they wish to bring the first or indeed the second cube into play, they must already have control in the space in which they wish to do so. So, for example, while Russia has presence here in Central Asia, they do not have control, which would require here 2 levels of influence. They cannot place military influence there, but they may do so here because they've just established the conditions, and so they will do so. They will put down 1 military influence there. The space selection cost has already been paid. And now why is this significant? Well, because once we played through a full round of a full set of 4 rounds of action phases here, as shown on the round track, we will get to the so-called globalization phase. The globalization phase has a number of steps, one of which is so-called the strategic posture contest. That means in spaces with military influence from opposing governance types, so from democracies and from authoritarians, a contest will occur. They will essentially try to remove each other's military influence in a dialogue-based contest. And so such a contest has now been set up by Russia there in Eastern Europe. And the catch is that if the democracies should lose, in this case NATO should lose that contest, both NATO powers will lose one victory point. So Russia can here impose a victory point loss on both the US and the EU. On the turn side, again, also in this dialogue-based contest, Direct modifiers may be paid, and US and EU may both pay. So that is then going to be the case. And so this was the move and a longer-term plan and a sort of a trap that the Russians have set up here. They are challenging the democratic military presence and advantage there. And that concludes the Russian second command. They are not in the position to play a third command, so they will move to the planning, which involves Russians bringing one card in from the so-called planning row here into play. Let's now bring some military cards into play, given that there is some of that action going to be happening very soon. And then the last thing remaining to be done is to draw the hand up to 5 cards. Again, this will be the card for the Russians during their next turn, having a nice collection of political cards there, for example. And so that concludes the Russian turn, and next up we've got the United States.